How many of you have seen the other video or audio clip, which is also an audio illusion? So it's not the Vanny Laurel one, but it's another one, and this is the one with Brainstorm or Green Needle. So most of you probably saw this one. Now, if you haven't heard it, I'll play it, but I don't know that it's going to work. You'll be able to hear it, but I don't know if the audio the effect will work. So, all right, so if you haven't heard it, here's the thing. I'm going to play the same sound. I swear to you, this time there's no trick. It'll always be the same sound every time you hear it. Nothing will change. But if you concentrate and expect to hear the word brainstorm, you will hear brainstorm very clearly. And all you have to do is change what you're expecting and say to yourself, all right, this time it's going to be green needle. And you just repeat that in your head. And when you listen to it, it's green needle. Now, green needle and brainstorm, they're not that close. So if you can hear yourself and you can go back and forth, as I can, between the two, this is a much stronger audio illusion than even the Laurel and Vanny one. So let's see if I can play it. All right, what do you hear? Brainstorm or green needle? All right, let's do it at the same time. Everybody think brainstorm. Brainstorm, 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 all right? Think brainstorm. We're all on brainstorm. Everybody's on brainstorm. Let's hear what it says. All right, brainstorm. Clearly. All right. All right, now everybody think green needle, green needle, green needle. Everybody, at the same time. Green needle, green needle, green needle, green needle. Green needle. Clear as day. All right. So how many of you could clearly hear both just by resetting your brain? I know not everybody can, but for those who can't, see how many can as the answers go by. Now, somebody said, are you tricking us? All right, I promise you, here are two promises. If I tell you directly like I am now, I am not tricking you, that will always be true. If I don't tell you whether I'm tricking you or not, you can always wonder, well, maybe it's a trick, and sometimes it might be something clever. But if I tell you directly, this is not a trick, which I'm doing right now, it'll never be a trick. All right? So let's have that bit of trust. This is real. This is your best example of how what you believe is your objective reality is so malleable that in real time you can change what you hear from one word to a completely different other word. Now, that is the world I live in all the time. Right? If you study this stuff, if you're a hypnotist, if you spend decades dealing with this field of knowledge, this is my normal reality. My normal reality is that if I'm sitting here, I know that you and I are not hearing the same thing, we're not thinking the same thing, and we're not in the same experience. Right? But most people think they are. I've left that behind. Now let me give you an example from Nick Gillespie of Reason TV and Reason.com, I think it is. He of course made the connection between Laurel and Vanny, and the topic yesterday with President Trump, was he calling MS-13 animals, or was he calling immigrants in general animals? And as Nick pointed out, we're hearing different things based on what we brought to it. So those of us who thought President Trump said something that was either offensive or not. That's not the world I live in. What President Trump said is completely divorced from what we heard. I heard what I expected to hear. Other people heard something completely different that they expected to hear. And it's even more interesting when you replay the MS-13 animals conversation and you play it in its full context. You say to yourself, okay, this is not the same as Laurel and Vanny. The MS-13 is just a case of something taken out of context. So you put it back in context, and then you show it to the people who thought he was talking about all immigrants. Do they say to themselves, oh, I guess I was fooled. It was taken out of context. Now that I hear the context, it's obviously he means MS-13. Well, some do. The AP, for example, reversed their story. CNN clarified their story so that it didn't look so much like a reversal. But a few people did. They said, oh, shoot, this was just out of context. But a lot of people, and you saw them on Twitter, a lot of people said, well, MS-13, we shouldn't call them animals. They're people too. Now, that's not really the kind of argument you would have heard from them before they got caught misinterpreting that video. So the weird impact was to get people to defend MS-13 so they didn't have to be wrong about the last thing, which is kind of mind-blowing to the people observing it who are not experiencing the cognitive dissonance. But once you start understanding that these little audio illusions are not the exception, they're not the exception. They are the rule. That we're all experiencing reality completely differently. A good example is there's a story I tell about my mother's experience. It doesn't matter what it is. There's a famous story from my childhood, something my mother did one day. And I was talking about that with my brother, and my brother said, no, that's not what happened. This object was not involved. It was an entirely different object. A very different object, not even close, except they both have a handle. That's about it. And I was positive of my memory. He has a better memory, so I've changed my opinion to whatever he said must be right. But we both lived in a world in which we were sure of something, and at least one of us was just completely wrong. I think it was me in that case. And our histories and our memories are like that. Until somebody has observed something in a way that refutes your memory, you can hold on to a false memory forever until you see proof it's not real. And then even when you see proof, you're going to interpret it as the proof is not a proof. So we're walking around in these completely different fictitious little movies in our heads. Some of us see Trump doing lots of good stuff. Some of us see a monster who's, needs to be removed from the public. Some of us see a Russia collusion involving President Trump. Other people see an intelligence service democratic Russian collusion to try to remove a fairly elected president. These things will never be resolved. Indeed, let me take this to another extreme. If you take all of these things to their extreme, here's what I believe about reality. And I know when you hear this will not be convincing. So I know that when I'm saying it. So I'm not trying to persuade you because I know there's no chance. I'm just telling you where you might end up. So if you don't hold this opinion yet, remember you didn't hold that opinion about that audio illusion long ago either. So your impression about reality is going to start to evolve. This is what I've been predicting would happen about now. A couple of years ago I predicted this. And here's where I am and have been for a long, long time. If I receive a sealed envelope in the mail, and let's say I know the topic, and it's going to be either good news for me or bad news for me, my view of reality is that the contents of the envelope are uncertain until I see them. In other words, it is not true that the contents of the envelope are objectively already determined because I haven't seen them. that the contents of the envelope only become real when I view them. Now, that would be wrong if I had talked to somebody who viewed them, because their viewing of them would seal it into reality until something changed. But, and somebody's saying that's magic. No, it's not magic. It's simply a different way of understanding how limited our perceptions are, right? So there might be some underlying reality, but it's pretty clear that humans don't have access to it. So in other words, when we're listening to these audio illusions, we feel like we're experiencing something like reality, but we're not. With the audio illusions, it's obvious that what we're dealing with is an interpretation of something we don't understand. And so, while it might be true that there's some objective reality about the envelope before I look at it, it could also be true that that objective reality is that it's not an envelope, that it's not even there. So there might be an objective reality, but it's not accessible by human brains. So we just have movies that are coherent within our own minds, and that's the best we can do. Now, let me put a bow on this. If it were true that reality is more of a perception than an objective thing that we're looking at, then it would also be true, and here's the freaky part, all right, this is my Friday kind of a topic. If reality is mostly a movie that we're inventing in our heads, even if there is a base reality that we just can't see and never will, if our reality is a movie, it should also be true, wait for it, that we can rewrite history. Right? So if my view of reality is correct, we can rewrite history under the condition that it hasn't been observed. Right? So if history has not been observed, we can rewrite it. So if I say, if I notice that there's a leak in my ceiling, and there are several possible things that could be causing it, that history of what it was that got us to the point where I noticed the leak is fungible, it's movable, it can be rewritten as many times as I need until I open up the ceiling and see the actual leak and I see where it's coming from. At that point, the reality and the history becomes solid. Now, has anybody heard of the double, yeah, here it is, somebody beat me to it. So where I was heading with this was the double slit experiment. I am not going to try to explain the double slit experiment, but Google it if you're not aware of it. So it's an experiment, roughly speaking, in which there are two slits and you put light through them and you measure the photons versus the waves, and there's some freaky thing that happens where your observation changes what happened in the past, or it appears to. Now that's the best explanation that I can give you, but it does seem that physics has confirmed that you can rewrite the past based on what you observe in the present. Now, imagine what this worldview does for people. All right. So my worldview is that basically anything's possible, in part because I can rewrite my past. So if I need a new past to make something possible today, as long as there's no observation that makes it impossible, I'll just rewrite the past until it's compatible with what I want in the future. Now, is any of this real? Don't know, because our realities are sort of things we write ourselves. So would I know if anything I'm saying makes sense, either in the world objectively or to you? No way to know. But there's my, so here's the other thing. If my view of the world is accurate, then there are a lot of things that you would think are impossible that I would not think are impossible. You get that? So one of the implications of my worldview that is really just a artificial movie we're all writing in our heads is that I can rewrite my movie far more flexibly than you could if your view is, everything's just determined, I'm just doop, 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 just trucking along according to, the variables that are coming in. Now, how would that make you act? If you believed anything's possible versus you believed you don't have any options. Things are just going to be the way they're going to be. Well, in my case, I would say, hey, why don't I pursue the best job I could ever want in my entire life? Let's say I want to be a cartoonist because it's like easy, fun work, and I want to be one of the top cartoonists in the world. Seriously? What are the frickin' odds of that happening? What are the odds that a little boy says, hey, I think I want to be a world famous cartoonist? Pretty low. Didn't stop me. What are the odds when I said to myself, I think I'll write, a book in a field in which I have no experience? How will that do? Turned out pretty well. So, when I transitioned to, predicting things about politics, first of all, predicting the future is impossible, right? But it's not looking that way, is it? Because I keep predicting the future, and I'm predicting very unlikely things. Trump's ascension, the North Korean stuff, which I'm still predicting will turn out well after the usual number of walkaways and hiccups. We should get something we like. Then somebody's saying, but maybe I'm creating the future. Am I influencing the future or predicting it? And here's the cool thing. They look exactly alike. There's no way to know. There's no way to know if I'm predicting the future or causing it. Or if your future and mine are different, so I'm not causing anything. I'm just rewriting my own movie. All possible in my world. So this is where the power of positive thinking kind of overlaps with this topic. The power of positive thinking is that you can essentially author your own future. You just have to think about it positively, do the things that positive people do, and you'll notice that your environment seems to be serving up things that you needed, things that you wanted. Now, that's not actually what's happening, but that's what it feels like is happening. And when you see how malleable reality is, and that you actually can hear brainstorm or you can hear green needle, and you just have to want to, then you can also rewire your ego. You can rewire your optimism, your ambition. There are a lot of things you can just rewire for optimization. You don't have to put up with them. Daily affirmations work. Thanks for the new job. So somebody here is using these concepts and just got a new job. Now, you can't tell, of course, whether that new job would have happened anyway. But here's what I would suggest. The first few times you see yourself authoring your own environment, you're going to think it's a coincidence. For example, you say to yourself, I want that job that's very unlikely I would get, and then you get that job. What's the first thing you say to yourself if you achieve the thing you thought was unlikely? You rewrite your history, and you say, oh, well, it wasn't that unlikely. I just thought it was unlikely, but I was wrong. Obviously, it was fairly likely because it happened. Not necessarily. You keep trying to author your reality, and after a number of times when you see that what you wanted to happen focused on, really put your mind to and visualized as much as you can, watch how often it happens, even when you thought it was unlikely. And the great thing is, even if that's not what's happening, even if you created an illusion that your thoughts were authoring the future, even if it's just an illusion, it's going to make you really happy because you'll have authored a life in which you have control over it. That will make you happy, even if none of it is related to a base reality that is not accessible by our tiny little human brains. All right, so here's the bigger point. So we saw President Trump getting elected and all these unusual things like North Korea progress and such. So our minds were already a little bit attuned to the unusual. We believed that things that we thought were impossible can actually happen. So Trump put us all in the frame of mind that, oh, I guess reality is not so predictable. I guess we have more options than it seemed. So that's the first thing. Then when we saw this Vanny or Laurel situation, people started really realizing that two people could sit in the same room and watch the same, two different movies on the same screen. This is the analogy I've been using for a while. And they can actually experience it. It's one thing to read about it and have somebody say, in a conceptual level, people are not seeing the same thing, and you read that and you go, yeah, conceptually, I get it, but it doesn't really affect you, right? It's just something you read. And then you experience it, like in real time. You're standing right next to somebody, you're listening to the same thing, and you're looking, no, that says Vanny, and the other one says, no, that says Laurel. What's happening? And then that one's freaky enough, but the one we did earlier in the Periscope, where you can just make yourself hear brainstorm, or you can, in seconds, just tune your brain to hear green needle, and they are so different. Once you realize how malleable your perceptions are, you have a superpower. Everybody who experienced this phenomenon just became more powerful. You don't know it yet, but it happened. Let me give you an example. I've talked a lot about the experience with psychedelics. Now, the reason that psychedelics are powerful is not just that when you're on them, you have an experience that's awesome, if you don't freak out and die, I suppose. But your experience is a specific kind, and the experience you have, I'll talk about psychedelic mushrooms in particular. That's my only experience. But people who have done LSD and other psychedelics will report similar things. And that is that when you're on psychedelic mushrooms or LSD, you recognize the world. You can operate in it. If you saw a pen, you would know how to pick it up. You would know how to use it. You know how to write. But everything would look like you're authoring it. It wouldn't look like it's necessarily an objective quality of the universe. You would see behind the screen. So when you're on hallucinogens, you can see reality behind the screen. It's like you walked up and you pulled the screen apart and you could see the mechanism behind it. And you're like, oh, shoot, now I get it. Everything on the other side of the screen is just a perception caused by all this stuff happening behind the screen. Once you get that model of the world, it doesn't leave after you're no longer on the hallucinogen, right? You're seeing some people confirm this. Look at the comments. You'll see the people confirming this. Once you've seen reality as a construct, meaning something you have put together in your mind that is independent from whatever base reality there might be. It's just not accessible to us, right? Brains are not, we didn't evolve to understand reality. We evolved to just survive, and apparently that's good enough. So once you've seen the base reality, now some people sort of got the weak version of this by watching the Matrix movies. Because if you watch the Matrix movies, it's the first time you say to yourself, holy cow, the real reality of the organic humans who are connected to machines in that movie, The Matrix, they're having the same experience as if they were real people operating in what was really their imagination, or something like it. So once you get the mental model that it is possible to have two completely different realities that sort of look alike, and feel alike, you start to think, well, maybe there's something in the real world that's like that movie. And then when you hear these audio illusions, you start to confirm it. You also notice that there's a lot of entertainment media that's coming around to the same concept, that reality is a little bit authorable, if I could say it that way. Now, the thing that I noticed about candidate Trump early on, and why I started writing about him, is that I could see that he was authoring reality. In other words, Trump did not find a set of rules and then say, watch me be the best one within these set of rules. He didn't do that. When Trump entered the reality started to form around him. He was authoring reality in real time, and we were making it real by observing it. Right? He was doing that. He is still doing that. He is in our heads in ways that nobody has ever been in our heads. His reality is not ours. True, but he is changing our realities. He's changing them in two different ways. The haters are changing it in a more hateful way. The people who like what he's doing are seeing a golden age emerge. Now, how is it possible that those two worlds can ever come together? Well, probably they never will, but we might find a way that all of us can get by. People perceive objective reality in different ways. That is correct. And which is another way of saying that objective reality may not be anything that any of us can perceive accurately. We're just using something that's real to create our artificial memories of things.